There are mornings that look ordinary, but in the unseen realm, your entire life has already begun to shift. You thought you were simply waking up to another day, another routine, another stretch of responsibility, but God marked this morning as the place where an old door closes and a new version of you is called by name. Chosen one, this week was not seen by heaven as 7 equal days. There is a day in the middle, a day standing between what has already happened and what is still waiting to unfold, a day where the weight of your past and the promise of your future are held in exact balance. And at that point of balance, God tipped the scale toward you. Before your eyes opened this morning, something had already been sealed over your name. Not a vague promise still depending on your perfection. Not a reward suspended somewhere above you until you prove yourself worthy. A verdict, final, written, established in the hidden place before the visible world had any idea what was happening. In the last 48 hours, you may have done something so small that no one around you noticed. Maybe it was 5 seconds of restraint when everything in you wanted to react. Maybe it was a prayer whispered through exhaustion. Maybe it was the moment you finally released a person, a wound, an expectation, or an old version of yourself that you had carried long past its season. The world does not record victories like that. Social media does not applaud silent obedience. People rarely celebrate the battles you win inside your own chest. But heaven saw it. And today, what once looked like it was breaking you has become the material God used to build a door. This door is not for the crowd. It has your name carved into it. It was built from the tears you hid, the seasons you endured, the faithfulness nobody understood, and the courage you carried when even you were tired of being strong. You are not entering this new chapter because you performed well before the world. You are entering because the Father saw you still believing when there seemed to be no reason left to believe. By the time this message reaches the deepest part of you, you will begin to recognize who you are becoming starting now, not someday, not when the circumstances finally look perfect, not when every person who doubted you finally understands what God was doing. Starting now, because the threshold has already opened, and the only thing left is for your spirit to agree with what heaven has already declared. Picture this with me. Somewhere on a Wednesday morning, in a season that has demanded everything from a person and returned what felt like very little, someone wakes up and moves through the familiar motions of life. The light comes through the window. The phone waits beside the bed. The same responsibilities are still there. The same silence may still be sitting in the room. From the outside, nothing looks different. It appears to be just another morning, another middle of the week, another day to endure. But beneath the surface, something is pressing forward, a knowing without a name, a readiness without a visible map, a quiet certainty that something real is beginning to move. That person is you. You did not arrive here by accident. The same God who arranged the hidden turns of your journey also arranged this moment. The words finding you right now, the timing of this message, the strange weight you feel inside your chest as you listen, none of it is random. It was assembled by care. It was shaped by the same divine intelligence that has been forming you through every season you did not choose, every delay you did not understand, every silence you had to survive without losing your faith completely. And this is what many people around you may never understand. Chosen ones do not always look ready from the outside. Sometimes they look tired. Sometimes they look quiet. Sometimes they look as if they have lost more than they have gained. But readiness in the kingdom is not measured by applause, status, speed, or public proof. It is measured by a spirit that is still willing after being stretched, a heart that still listens after being disappointed, and an inner ear that has finally become sensitive enough to hear what God is saying underneath the noise. You are ready, not because life has been easy, but because the pressure did not destroy what was sacred in you. There are things only someone carrying the weight of a chosen life can truly understand. Things you may have stopped trying to explain because every time you opened your mouth, the words felt too small for the reality you were living. How do you explain what it feels like to sense a future you cannot yet touch? How do you describe carrying purpose in one hand and waiting in the other, while not knowing when the tension between them will finally break? You know what it is to pray with full faith and still wake up to silence. You know what it is to obey when the road ahead is unclear. You know what it is to give your best in a season that does not seem to recognize the value of what you are bringing. You know what it is to stand in a room full of people and still feel a loneliness that has nothing to do with the number of bodies around you. It is the loneliness of someone who sees differently, feels deeply, and carries a weight others cannot perceive. And perhaps one of the hardest things you have carried is the grief of not being able to settle. You watched people around you accept lives that looked comfortable, predictable, and safe, but something inside you could not make peace with that. Not because you believe you are better than them, not because you look down on anyone, but because betraying what God placed inside you would cost more than being misunderstood ever could. That restlessness was not rebellion, that ache was not weakness, that inner dissatisfaction was not proof that something was wrong with you. It was the evidence that something sacred in you was still alive. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before one morning at the edge of the promised land changed the meaning of everything. 40 years of preparation for a crossing that happened in a single day. And that is what many people fail to understand about the way God forms chosen ones. The miracle may arrive suddenly, but the making never does. The door may open in one moment, but the person who walks through it was built in seasons nobody applauded. From the outside, people may have looked at Moses and seen a man who had fallen from importance. A man who once moved through the halls of power, now tending sheep in a desert no one celebrated. But heaven saw something different. God was dismantling every identity built on borrowed authority. He was removing the need to be validated by systems, titles, platforms, and human approval, so that something deeper, quieter, and far more durable could rise in its place. What the world called irrelevance, God called preparation. What people called delay, God called design. What looked like wasted years was actually the sacred stripping away of everything that could not enter the next chapter. And maybe this is why your own wilderness has felt so confusing. You thought you were losing time. You thought you were falling behind. You thought other people were moving forward while you were being held in the same hidden place. But what if the hidden place was not holding you back? What if it was holding you together? What if God kept you there because the version of you that entered that season was not strong enough, clear enough, discerning enough, or free enough to carry what He had already prepared? The wilderness is not the destination. It is the doorway. It is the place where false urgency dies, where shallow identity breaks, where borrowed confidence is stripped away, and where the voice of God becomes louder than the noise of comparison. And every doorway eventually ends at a morning, sometimes a Tuesday, sometimes a Thursday, and sometimes a Wednesday, when God says, "Rise, cross, and enter what I have been holding in reserve for you." This Wednesday is that kind of morning for you. And here is how you know you are standing at a real threshold, not just imagining one because you are tired of waiting. There are signs that appear in the life of a chosen one just before the crossing. And when they are named, something inside you will recognize them because you have already been living them. The first sign is a restlessness that no adjustment can resolve. You have tried to fix it with new routines, new plans, new environments, maybe even new people. You told yourself that if you changed the schedule, changed the room, changed the way you thought, the ache would finally disappear. But it remained. Not because something is wrong with you, but because something is right. Deep within you, there is a part of your spirit that knows the old season has expired. That restlessness is not anxiety. It is readiness searching for its appointed moment. The second sign is a shifting in your relationships. People who once felt central may now feel distant. Conversations that once fed you may now drain you. Connections that once seemed natural may now feel heavy, forced, or misaligned. This does not always mean betrayal. Sometimes it means transition. God is not only preparing you for the new chapter, He is preparing the landscape around you so that the next season can hold who you are becoming. The third sign is a heightened sensitivity to what is genuine and what is not. You can no longer sit comfortably inside pretense. Surface conversations feel exhausting. Empty achievements feel loud but meaningless. Performances of success no longer impress you the way they once did. This is not arrogance. This is discernment activating. The wilderness sharpened your spirit, and now your inner life is sorting everything around you, deciding what belongs in the new chapter and what cannot cross with you. The fourth sign is unexpected peace. Not because every problem has disappeared, but because something deeper than circumstances has settled inside you. It is God saying without words, "I have not forgotten you. I have been here the whole time." The fifth sign is the simplest, but it may be the most powerful. You are here right now, receiving these words in a moment that does not feel accidental. Something in you already sensed that this day carried a weight ordinary days do not carry. You may not have been able to name it when you woke up, but there was a quiet pressure in your spirit, a feeling that something was asking to be noticed, something was asking to be received, something was calling you out of the familiar version of yourself. And if these signs are landing inside you, do not treat that as coincidence. There are moments when God does not shout from the sky. He confirms through recognition. He lets a word touch the exact place that has been aching in silence. He lets a sentence find the hidden room inside you where your deepest questions have been waiting. That recognition is not emotional manipulation. It is spiritual alignment. It is your inner witness saying, "This is mine, this is where I am. This is the threshold I have been standing at without knowing its name. Now I want to speak to what was being built in you during the seasons that pressed the hardest." Because the wilderness is not only a place where things are stripped away, it is also a place where things are constructed. Certain qualities can only grow under pressure. Certain dimensions of faith can only form when comfort has been removed. Certain kinds of endurance cannot be learned from books, sermons, success stories, or easy seasons. They are built in the private places where you kept going when no one knew how much it cost. In your hardest season, you were building a rare endurance, not the shallow kind that simply waits for the storm to pass while becoming bitter inside, but the kind that deepens, matures, and becomes more rooted as the season extends. The kind that says, "Even if I do not understand the timing, I will not surrender my soul to despair. Even if the answer has not arrived, I will not abandon the one who has been carrying me through the silence." That endurance is not small. It is the very thing that positions a chosen one for the crossing. You do not cross into a promised land on borrowed momentum. You cross on the strength of what was built slowly, painfully, and deliberately in the years that felt most like delay. The endurance you carry now was not created in one emotional moment. It was formed every time you kept praying when nothing changed. Every time you showed up with integrity when no one rewarded you. Every time you chose not to harden your heart, even though life gave you more than enough reasons to do so. And in your season of waiting, something else was being built in you. Discernment. There is a kind of spiritual hearing that only develops when all your striving has been exhausted. When every plan you made for yourself reaches the end of its road. When the noise of ambition, fear, comparison, and urgency begins to fall away because none of it can rescue you from the wilderness. In that quiet, the inner ear starts to open. The voice of truth becomes clearer. The direction that belongs to your deepest design becomes more specific. You begin to recognize what is God and what is pressure, what is calling and what is distraction, what is alignment and what is merely familiar. This is why the waiting season was not empty. It was calibrating you. It was teaching you to hear at a level you could not hear when life was louder. It was making you sensitive enough to notice doors that do not announce themselves with noise, and strong enough to walk away from doors that look impressive but carry no peace. And in your season of loss, God was doing a work you could not fully understand at the time. The relationships that ended, the dreams that changed form, the versions of yourself you had to release, none of these things were evidence that your life was being reduced. You were not being emptied as punishment. You were being prepared for capacity. The old containers were too small for the weight of what is coming. What felt like loss was God clearing ground. What felt like removal was holy room being made for what could finally grow. The soil of your life was being turned over, not because it was barren, but because what God intended to plant next required depth. Flat ground could not hold it. Shallow roots could not sustain it. A surface version of you could not carry a season with this much weight, this much authority, this much responsibility, and this much blessing. So the ground had to be broken. The hidden places had to be opened. The parts of you that had only known how to survive had to be exposed, healed, strengthened, and made ready to receive. This is why the people who moved away from you in this season were not always evidence of rejection. Sometimes their distance was protection. Sometimes their silence was mercy. Sometimes the connections that became thin were being loosened by God because they could not go where your spirit was being taken. The promised land is inhabited differently than the wilderness. The atmosphere is different. The language is different. The level of responsibility is different. And God will not allow your next chapter to be crowded with people who only know how to relate to the old version of you. What the enemy tried to label as rejection, God was using as repositioning. What felt like isolation was often consecration. What looked like being forgotten was actually being hidden until the right season could reveal you without destroying you. You were not being pushed out of life. You were being pulled out of misalignment. And now, something is changing. The ground that once felt hard is beginning to answer. The silence that once felt empty is beginning to carry instruction. The space that once frightened you is beginning to feel sacred. You are starting to understand that God was not just removing things from your life. He was reorganizing the entire landscape so that what is coming toward you can recognize who you have become. The people assigned to your next chapter will not require you to shrink in order to be loved. They will not need a long explanation to sense the weight of your calling. They will carry a frequency that agrees with your future, not one that constantly pulls you back into your past. And this is why the next part of your life will not feel like a simple continuation of the old one. It will feel like a different atmosphere, because the person entering it is no longer the same person who survived the wilderness. Something has been formed in you that cannot be reversed. You may still look familiar to people who knew you before, but inwardly, your posture has changed. Your tolerance for emptiness has changed. Your appetite for truth has changed. Your ability to recognize what drains your spirit has changed. You are not harder. You are clearer. You are not colder. You are more consecrated. There is a word in ancient Hebrew that belongs to a morning like this. The word is Rashit. It is often translated as beginning, but it carries a deeper meaning than simply the first point in a sequence. Rashit speaks of first fruits, the portion that is set apart, the beginning that contains the promise of everything that will follow. It is not just the start of something ordinary. It is the representative piece of the harvest, the beginning that reveals the nature of the season. That is what this day represents for you. Not just another attempt to start over, not another emotional reset that fades by evening. This is a first fruits moment. What begins in you now carries the pattern of what God is unfolding in the season ahead. The clarity that touches you today is a sign of greater clarity coming. The peace that settles today is a sign of deeper stability coming. The courage rising today is evidence that the old fear is losing its authority. And there is another word that belongs here too, Kairos. Ordinary time moves through hours, calendars, routines, and deadlines. That is Chronos. But Kairos is appointed time. It is the moment heaven has marked before the clock ever reached it. Your wilderness was Chronos, long necessary time that shaped you day after day. But this threshold is Kairos. This is not random timing. This is the appointed window where what was formed in secret begins to meet what God prepared in advance. So carry this with you into the rest of this day. What you speak over yourself now matters, not because words are magic, but because identity must be agreed with before it can be inhabited. You are not trying to create something out of nothing. You are aligning with what God has already been building in the unseen. The declaration does not replace obedience, it awakens it. It does not cancel the process. It gives your spirit permission to step forward without begging the past for approval. Say this within yourself if you can. I am not the person who barely survived the last season. I am the person that season was building. I am not defined by what I lost. I am positioned by what was formed in the losing. I am not behind. I am not forgotten. I am standing at the exact place God intended me to reach, with a spirit that has been tested, refined, and made ready for what comes next. This is the moment where the survival identity must be laid down. The version of you that knew how to endure was necessary, but it cannot govern the promised land. Survival says, do not expect too much. Receiving says, I am no longer shocked when God is faithful. Survival waits until every sign is visible. Receiving walks because the verdict has already been sealed. Survival protects the wound. Receiving trusts the healer. And chosen one, you are allowed to receive. You are allowed to outgrow the story that pain wrote over you. You are allowed to release the relationships that can only recognize your old self. You are allowed to step into clarity, connection, provision, peace, and divine capacity without apologizing for becoming more whole. You are the pioneer, the one who walks first so others can believe crossing is possible. You are the light bearer, carrying presence into rooms that were heavy before you arrived. You are the deliverer, not by force, but by example. And today, this threshold opens before you. You are not waiting anymore. You are walking, starting now, starting this day. It is sealed. It is done.